In the first two parts of this topic, we work with some tools that will help us work better with budgets that can be a little large and cumbersome. We worked with grouping worksheets so that we could create things and apply them like custom formats and calculations, but only have to apply them once instead of time and time and time again. We then took some time to consolidate data. We did so in kind of the old-fashioned but still relevant way of creating three-dimensional formulas. We also used the consolidation tool, and we discussed subtotals and how all of these allow us to consolidate data from multiple places and see them more easily in something like a summary sheet. In this last part, we want to address how to add visual representations of our data to our budgets, and we're going to start with sparklines. We know that in general it's faster and easier for people to understand numbers when they are represented visually. So we're going to work first with sparklines, which are one of the most recent additions to the charting features in Excel. They're just little mini charts that are placed inside of individual cells and can represent row and column values in a very visual way. Now, I've done a little bit of work with this worksheet since we finished our last topic. Primarily, I shrunk down a couple of the columns to make things fit better. I want to make sure, though, that we don't lose our labels on the left-hand side as we scroll further to the right. So I'm going to go ahead and select all of column D, and then move to the View tab. And from the Freeze Panes option, we're going to choose to freeze the panes. This allows us to now scroll to the right without losing those labels. Why is that important? Because the very last column that we currently have for our data is column P, and that's where we have totaled all of the rows to give us an annual cost for each of our line items. If we move over to the right, normally our labels would have kind of dribbled over onto the left-hand edge and we wouldn't be able to see them, but now we can because of freezing the panes. We're going to go ahead and create a sparkline. Now we actually want to create our first sparkline for the very top row of our data, which is row 4, our monthly totals. By selecting the cell and then moving to the Insert tab, and then looking about half or 2/3 of the way over, we see an entire grouping for sparklines. There are 3 types of sparklines: lines, columns, and win-loss. We're going to choose the column type. This displays the Create Sparklines window, which actually is very simple. All it needs to know is what range of data we want to use for our sparkline. We'll roll this up, and we'll select all of the values from December back to January. Now, we do not want to include the values in column P because that's a total of what we already have, and it would make our chart look a little bit off. So we'll simply click and drag, and then roll that window back down. Make sure that it says D4 to O4, and that's all there is to it. Because we already had our destination cell, which is cell Q4 selected, we don't need to fill in the location range. We can simply click OK. Because I know this can be just a little bit difficult to see depending on how you're viewing it, we're going to go ahead and zoom in a little. And now we can see the sparkline a little bit easier. Sparklines, just like text values and numeric values, can be filled. So we can apply the sparkline to all of our line items by simply moving to the bottom right corner of the cell, getting the little black plus sign, and dragging down. We also can modify how sparklines appear by adjusting the width of the column. Notice if we make the Q column very narrow, they get kind of squished together. We can still see kind of the basics of the chart, but it's a little more difficult. On the other hand, spreading it out can sometimes give us too much room. So find a happy medium on how you want to display your sparkline. The sparklines are not intended to give us very detailed information. They're intended and designed to give us an overview. In this case, it's exactly what we want. We can see, for example, that in row 10, which is our internet expense, we have a completely flat chart. That's because every single office, every single month, pays exactly the same amount for their internet service. So this is what we'd expect. On the other hand, if we're trying to get an overview of expenses, we could take a look at the very last line item, which is for catering expenses. Now, we obviously can't see specifically which values these are, but what we can see is that there are obviously 3 months in the year where our catering costs are significantly higher than other months. We may know that that's because most of our offices tend to do some type of activity in July for the summer, and then, of course, a couple of activities for the holiday season. Once again, the purpose of this is not to give us details, but to let us compare easily the values over time and to analyze trends in our spending. Many of the other cells do the same. Most of them, again, make sense. If something doesn't make a lot of sense, for example, why the cost for rent is high on both ends of the spectrum, the first quarter and the last quarter, but not in the middle, then we might need to do a little bit more research into the specific spreadsheets that are based off of these summaries. Sparklines certainly can be useful, but as we said, they don't give details. If we want details, that's when we go to one of the old standbys and what Excel is probably most known for, and that is a good old chart. We're going to create a chart, though, not the hard way, but the easy way. Dare I even say the magical way. Why do I say it that way? Because we actually can do an entire series, and have done an entire series, just on charts. There's a lot of details there. But what I know is that most people can really create what they need with just a couple of the features, and I can do that with one magic key. Before we get to the magic key, we need to select some data. So let's start by selecting the data that we want, which again is not going to include column P. We want to start at column O. And again, I know it's like working backwards, but one of the reasons I do this is to show people that Excel doesn't care what direction you do things. It understands whether you work left to right, right to left, top to bottom, or bottom to top. So we've selected the data that we want, including the labels. With that, we want to turn it into a chart. Ready for the magic key? Here it comes. Ta-da! Now, what is the magic key? The magic key is F11. It's been around for basically forever in Excel terms, but a lot of people don't know about it. Now, the ribbon has made making charts much faster than using the old wizard that had 3 or 4 steps, sometimes more, but this is the one that we need most often. It creates a default chart, which, unless you've changed it, is a column chart. What I notice is that we do have one line of data that we really don't want, and that's the monthly totals. It's totaling up what we're already seeing in the chart. We can quickly modify what data is being used in the chart by using the Chart Tools Design contextual tab. Now, they kind of moved it around a little bit. In 2013, which is what I'm using, it's on the right-hand side. Regardless, just look for the option on the Chart Design tab that says Select Data. You could either type it in, you could select it again, but in this case, we simply want to remove one of our series, which is on the left-hand side. We remove the check mark from monthly total and don't have to do anything else fancy with it. We can simply click or tap OK. Our chart is already looking a lot better, but unfortunately, we have this one series that is just what I like to call disparate data. It strongly outweighs everything else. We know, of course, that this represents our rent, because our rent is by far the most expensive expense that we have every month. How can we deal with this? Well, a lot of people would simply remove it. But you know what? The rent is a big part of our expenses. And if we just take it out of the chart, then that's not really accurately describing our budget now, is it? There are many ways to handle this. I just want to show you one of them. And that is when you have very different values that need to be displayed in one chart, we can create something called a secondary axis. That will make this column, this bar, a lot smaller in relationship to the others. How do we do it? Well, we simply click to select the series that we're interested in. Then we can right-click and go to Format Data Series. Now, of course, we also could have done that by using a variety of ribbon options, but Format Data Series is the option we ultimately want to get to. There's a simple option now to simply put this on a secondary axis. With that, we can close out the pane and see that our chart is now much more usable. Of course, we can work with colors. We can work with different types of scales. We can work with even different types of combination charts where maybe our rent shows up as something different. But this really gets us what we were looking for, which is a simple overview of the budget as a whole. It shows the value for all of the skinny columns along the left, and those expenses are obviously $4,000 or less. If we look at the right-hand side of our chart, this is where we see the total costs for the rent or lease that we have between all of our properties. And unfortunately, I guess, those numbers are significantly higher, but we've been able to represent them all visually on a single chart instead of multiple charts. Budgets can be very complex. Likewise, the things that we can do with them using all of Excel's features are also very complex. What we want to strive for, though, is something that is flexible, that is also easily understood, and that will allow all of the users or viewers of this worksheet to be able to see the information they need in the way that they need to see it. Whether it be by creating charts and sparklines, or summarizing data using three-dimensional formulas, consolidation, or subtotals, or even allowing people to go back to the source data, which is in each of our individual worksheets by location. and be able to see that information in detail. We know that we now have flexible, meaningful budgets that are useful to everyone in our business. That is an important part of making good business and management decisions. That's what budgets are about, helping you create realistic, attainable goals and monitor progress in meeting them. It's not always easy to do, but budgets need to be the basis for working with expenses within your business in order to ensure success.